Chris Troy, 67 years old, lives on a small ranch in Arizona. Every morning at 5 a.m., he wakes up, drinks his coffee, and sits on his porch watching the desert landscape. His neighbors know him only as a quiet, polite retiree. But there's something they don't know. 23 years ago, this same man was at the center of one of America's most classified operations. An operation so sensitive that a single mistake could have led to an international war. And that mistake was made. Today I'm going to tell you Chris Troy's story that he's never told anyone. Because some stories are so heavy that those who carry them live and die in silence. But this story deserves to be told. What city are you watching this video from? Let us know in the comments. And if you believe real hero stories should be told, hit that subscribe button. Because what you're about to learn today will show you not how a man survived, but how his survival should have been impossible. March 2001. Chris Troy, then 44 years old, was serving as a sniper with Navy SEAL Team 6. He had 22 years of military experience. From Vietnam to Iraq, from Afghanistan to Somalia, he had conducted operations in the world's most dangerous regions. Chris's specialty wasn't just marksmanship. He was also known for his tactical intelligence and composure. His friends called him Ghost, because when he reached his target, no one even realized he was there. But that March day, when he was called to the Special Operations Center at Quantico, he didn't know how different the mission awaiting him would be. When he entered the briefing room, there were only 3 people: Operation Commander Colonel Harrison, CIA Agent Sarah Martinez, and Tim Rodriguez, a sniper like himself. Rodriguez was 8 years younger than Chris and had been his partner for the past 3 years. Colonel Harrison placed a file on the table. "Code name, Silent Storm," he said. "This operation officially doesn't exist. It won't appear in any records. If you fail, we don't know you." Chris listened silently. These kinds of briefings weren't new to him. But the tension on Sarah Martinez's face told him this wasn't an ordinary operation. "Our target is Dr. Alexander Petrov," Martinez said, placing a photograph on the table. "Russian-born nuclear physicist. He escaped from Moscow 3 months ago. We don't know exactly what he has with him. But according to intelligence reports, there are documents related to new generation nuclear weapons technology." Chris looked at the photograph. Petrov was in his 50s, thin, wearing glasses. He didn't look particularly dangerous. "Where is he?" Chris asked. "Here's the problem," Colonel Harrison said. "His last known location is a region near the Syrian border, but we can't officially acknowledge his presence in that area, for diplomatic reasons." Rodriguez leaned forward. "So we were never there, right?" "Exactly," Martinez said. "If you're captured, it will be considered a rogue operation. The United States will deny any connection to you." "Mission parameters?" Chris asked. "Capture Petrov. Take his documents and bring him to the designated extraction point," Harrison said. "But be careful, don't kill him. Russia is looking for this man. If he's found dead, they might connect it to us. That would cause an international crisis." Chris and Rodriguez made eye contact. They both knew this wouldn't be easy. The preparation process for the operation took 3 days. Chris and Rodriguez studied the geography near the Syrian border, analyzed weather reports, and planned possible escape routes. Chris was methodical as always. He checked his equipment 3 times. Baird M82 sniper rifle, Glock 19 pistol, night vision device, radio, first aid kit, and 72 hours worth of food. Rodriguez prepared with similar equipment. The operation area was a mountainous region in northern Syria. According to intelligence reports, Petrov was hiding in an old monastery. The area was controlled by local militias, but they weren't an organized force. The duo was dropped by a Black Hawk helicopter at a point near the region at midnight. As soon as the helicopter left them, it disappeared. Now they were completely on their own. The monastery is 8 kilometers from here. Rodriguez said, looking at his GPS, the terrain is rough, but we can approach stealthily. Chris surveyed the surroundings. In the moonlight, The desert displayed a strange beauty, but death lurked beneath that beauty. He knew this from experience. They walked silently for 2 hours. Chris's ear was attuned to every sound, his eyes to every shadow. Rodriguez was equally alert. 2 kilometers from the monastery, Chris stopped. "Wait," he whispered. A fire could be seen in the distance. He examined it with binoculars. 3 men, automatic weapons. Probably Petrov's guards. Rodriguez pulled out his own scope. "How do we approach?" Chris formed the plan in his mind. "You approach from the east. I'll go from the west. We move at 3 o'clock. First, we neutralize the sentries. Then we find Petrov." They separated. Chris began advancing toward the monastery through the rocks. Every step was calculated, every breath controlled. The monastery was an old structure surrounded by stone walls. Light was burning inside. As Chris approached the wall, he heard voices from inside. They were speaking Arabic. At exactly 3 a.m., they struck. Chris silently scaled the monastery wall, while Rodriguez entered through the east gate. The 3 guards were neutralized without a sound. 2 knocked unconscious, 1 disabled with a suppressor. Chris and Rodriguez advanced toward the monastery's main building. Inside, the only light came from a small room. They cracked open the room's door. Inside, a man was bent over a desk. Dr. Alexander Petrov. On the desk were documents, a laptop, and papers with chemical formulas written on them. Rodriguez opened the door and entered. "Dr. Petrov," he said, pointing his weapon at him. "You're under arrest by the United States of America." Petrov looked up. In his eyes was not fear, but strange relief. Finally, he said in Russian-accented English, "I was waiting for you to come." Chris frowned. This was not the reaction he had expected. "Raise your hands and slowly stand up," Rodriguez said. Petrov raised his hands, but didn't stand up. "There's something you need to know," he said. "I'm not just hiding here. I'm waiting for something." "What are you waiting for?" Chris asked. "People who want to buy me. They're coming tonight." Chris's blood ran cold. "Who?" "I don't know, but they offered a lot of money for these documents." Rodriguez and Chris made eye contact. This was changing the operation's parameters. "When are they coming?" Rodriguez asked. "At 4 o'clock. So..." Petrov checked his watch. "In 20 minutes. Chris thought quickly. They had to change their plans. They needed to take Petrov and leave immediately. "Collect the documents," he told Rodriguez. "I'll prepare Petrov." But just then, the sound of motors came from the distance. Vehicles were approaching. "Too late," Chris whispered. "We need to hide." As the motor sound approached, Chris quickly assessed the situation. They couldn't hide in the monastery courtyard. If they tried to escape with Petrov, they'd be caught in the open terrain. "We'll ambush here," Chris said. "Rodriguez, take position at the east window. I'll control the west." Outside, the vehicle stopped. 3 SUVs. 3 to 4 armed men got out of each one. A total of 12 people. And these weren't local militia. They looked professional. "Rodriguez," he whispered over the radio. 12 targets. Heavily armed. Professional team. The armed men surrounded the monastery. One of their leaders entered the courtyard and shouted loudly, "Dr. Petrov, we've come to talk." Petrov stood up. Chris signaled him to stay quiet, but Petrov didn't listen. "I'm here," he shouted. The armed man began approaching the room. "Dr. Petrov, are the documents ready?" the man asked. "Yes," Petrov said, "but I want to see the money first." The man laughed. "Money? Dr. Petrov, did you think we'd talk money with you?" At that moment, Chris understood. These men hadn't come to buy Petrov. They had come to kill him. Rodriguez were moving, he said over the radio. 3, 2, 1. Chris jumped to the window and neutralized 2 men in the courtyard with surprise tactics. At the same time, Rodriguez moved from the east side. But the armed men were prepared. They reacted much faster than Chris expected. The firefight began. Chris used a Barrett rifle to try to neutralize long-range targets. Rodriguez was providing close-range defense. In the first 2 minutes, they neutralized 6 men, but the remaining ones took positions and began returning fire. "Chris," Rodriguez shouted, "there are too many." But just then, something unexpected happened. Dr. Petrov left the room and began running toward the courtyard with documents clutched in his hands. "Petrov, get back," Chris shouted. But Petrov didn't listen. Chris had to follow him. He called Rodriguez over the radio. "Petrov is escaping. I'm following him." "Copy. I'm cleaning up here." But Rodriguez made a mistake. He left his position to try to follow Chris. The armed men used this opportunity to ambush him. Chris was running to catch Petrov when he heard an explosion from behind, from Rodriguez's position. Rodriguez, he called over the radio. No answer came. Chris caught Petrov. "Dr. Petrov, what are you doing? They were going to kill me." Petrov said breathlessly, "They'll kill everyone to get these documents." "Then why did you call them?" "I didn't call them. They found me." Chris understood. Petrov didn't know who these men were, but none of this mattered now. He had to save Rodriguez. "Petrov, stay here. Don't move." Chris returned to the monastery. When he approached Rodriguez's last position, he found him lying on the ground. He had been shot in the leg. "Rodriguez, how are you?" "I'm fine, just my leg." "But Chris, there's a problem. These men aren't Russian. I heard them talking. They're speaking a mixture of Arabic and English. Professional mercenaries." At that moment, a terrible possibility occurred to Chris. What if this operation was wrong from the beginning? What if Petrov wasn't a real physicist? "Can you get up?" "With help. But I can't move fast." Chris supported Rodriguez. Together, they began moving toward where Petrov was hiding. But the armed men were following them too. Chris and Rodriguez tried to leave the monastery with Dr. Petrov. Because Rodriguez's leg was wounded, their movement was slow. "How far is the extraction point?" Rodriguez asked in pain. 8 kilometers north. "But in this condition, it'll take us hours to get there. These men won't wait that long." Chris knew he was right. They needed to make another plan. "Dr. Petrov," he said, "do you know this area? Is there anywhere we can hide?" Petrov thought. "Yes, there is. 2 kilometers east from here, there's an old cave system. Byzantine era. Very complex. Easy to get lost in. Can you get us there?" "Yes, but it's dangerous. You could get lost inside." The 3 men began advancing toward the caves in the darkness of night. The motor sound from behind showed they were being followed. When they reached the caves, Chris looked inside and hesitated for a moment. From the cave entrance, a dark tunnel extended inward. If they got lost inside, no one would find them. Inside, the cave was much more complex than they had thought. Tunnels branched off, going up and down. Petrov led them inside. "This is safe," he said when they reached a large chamber. It's impossible for them to find this place. But Chris wasn't comfortable. "Dr. Petrov, what's really in these documents?" Petrov stopped. For a moment, he seemed to be trying to make a decision. "I'll tell you the truth," he said finally. "I'm not a real nuclear physicist." Chris and Rodriguez looked at him in shock. "I'm an agent. I work for Russian intelligence. This operation is a trap." Chris's hand automatically went to his weapon. "What kind of trap?" "To detect America's covert operations. We knew you were coming. We wanted to learn the intelligence information that came with you. Are those armed men part of your team too?" "No," Petrov said quickly. "They're not part of the plan. They're real, and they want to kill me because I'm tired of this game. I want to return to my own country now." Chris was confused. "So you're really a Russian agent, but they're trying to kill you?" "Yes, because I've abandoned this trap operation. I want to seek asylum in America. I'll give real intelligence information. What's in these documents then? Real documents. But not about Russian nuclear programs. About Russia's covert operations in the Middle East. Very valuable information for America. At that moment, sounds came from outside the cave. The armed men had found them. How did they find us? Rodriguez whispered. Chris understood. Tracking device. Petrov has a tracking device on him. Petrov checked his pants. He found a small device in his jacket's lining. When was this placed? Chris asked. I don't know, but it's too late now. The sound from outside were getting closer. Chris took a position near the cave entrance. Rodriguez, despite his wounded leg, positioned himself where he could control the deep part of the cave. The armed men entered the cave. Chris positioned himself in the darkness. Using his night vision device, he watched the cave entrance. When the first man entered, he silently neutralized him. But the second man was more careful. A firefight began inside the cave. But just then, something unexpected happened. Dr. Petrov came out from behind Chris and shouted to the armed men, I'm here. I surrender. Chris turned in shock. Petrov, what are you doing? The armed men had detected Chris's position. Gunshots echoed inside the cave. Rodriguez, Petrov sold us out. Copy. But there's a problem, Chris. Men are coming from the back of the cave, too. They've surrounded us. But the real shock came when he heard Dr. Petrov talking to the armed men. Our plan was successful, Petrov said in Russian. We captured 2 American agents. At that moment, Chris understood. Petrov really was a Russian agent, but he had never wanted to switch sides. This entire operation was a trap. Chris, Rodriguez shouted, I found an exit route. There's another tunnel in the deep part of the cave. Chris and Rodriguez escaped through the tunnel, emerging into the desert at dawn. They were 15 kilometers from the main extraction point, having gone in the wrong direction. We need to call for a helicopter, Chris said. He opened the emergency radio and requested evacuation. This is Bravo Team. We need emergency evacuation. Copy, Bravo Team. Helicopter will be there in 2 hours. 2 hours. To wait 2 hours in the desert with a wounded companion while their water supplies dwindled. Rodriguez's condition was worse than they thought. He had lost a lot of blood and showed signs of infection. When they reached some rocks for shade, the sound of motors came from the distance. Vehicles were approaching. Petrov's men, Rodriguez said, they found us. Chris looked through binoculars. 2 vehicles were coming, full of armed men. Chris prepared the Barrett rifle and stopped the first vehicle. With a single shot, the firefight began again. But this time Chris was in a completely defensive position. Rodriguez was wounded, ammunition was running low, and there was nowhere to hide in the middle of the desert. After a 15-minute firefight, Chris made his final mistake. He left his position to try to move Rodriguez to a safer place. But while moving, his foot caught on something and he fell. A mine. The explosion shattered the desert silence. When Chris came to from the shock of the explosion, blood was flowing from his right ear. The blast had thrown him 3 meters away. Rodriguez was lying motionless behind a rock with both his old wound and new shrapnel wounds. Both are broken, Chris said, checking their destroyed communication equipment. Their situation was very bad. In the middle of the desert, wounded, communication equipment broken, and there were mines around them. Chris put Rodriguez on his back and began moving slowly toward a hill 500 meters away. At every step, he first checked the ground for mines. 500 meters took 2 hours. At the hill, Chris tried to repair the broken radio. After working for an hour, a weak signal came. This is Bravo Team. Emergency. Coordinates. The signal was weak and cutting out. In the afternoon, the sound of a helicopter came from the distance. Chris pulled out a signal flare and fired it. The helicopter approached and spotted them. Because there might be mines around, They had to use ropes from the air. A paramedic descended and examined Rodriguez. His condition is critical, he said. We need to get him to the hospital immediately. At the hospital, Rodriguez's surgery lasted 6 hours. Chris sat in the waiting room, going over all the details of the operation in his mind again and again. Colonel Harrison came. Chris, how are you? I'm fine, sir. How's Rodriguez? The surgery was successful. They were able to save his leg, but he'll need physical therapy for a long time. Chris nodded. Sir, I have some questions about this operation. Harrison sat down. Chris, you can't tell anyone outside what I'm about to tell you. Understood. Understood, sir. Dr. Petrov wasn't a real person. He was an identity we created. Chris was shocked. What do you mean? This operation was a test operation. It was designed to measure your and Rodriguez's reactions before real operations. A test. Chris's voice rose. Rodriguez almost died. I know, and I'm sorry about that. But the operation got out of control. Harrison took a deep breath. Those armed men weren't part of our team. They were real mercenaries. And they were looking for the real Dr. Petrov. Yes, there's a real Dr. Alexander Petrov, a Russian nuclear physicist, and he's really hiding in Syria. Those armed men were trying to find him. Then, who was the Petrov we encountered? Agent David Miller, from the CIA. He was also part of the test operation. He was playing the role of a Russian agent to deceive you. Chris understood. So while we were in a test operation, real mercenaries were looking for the real Petrov and encountered us. Exactly. And they thought Agent Miller was the real Petrov. Where's Miller now? Harrison paused. Chris, Miller was killed in that cave. The mercenaries killed him because they thought he was the real Petrov. Chris sat quietly. Agent Miller had been killed while doing his job, and they couldn't prevent it. This information cannot be told to anyone. Harrison said, Miller's family will think he died in a terrorist attack in Syria. 3 months later, Rodriguez was released from the hospital. His leg had permanent damage, but he could walk. As Chris drove him home, they talked about their future. Chris, do you think we'll ever forget that operation? Rodriguez said, No, but we won't try to forget it either. There are lessons we learned. What lessons? Chris thought, think twice before trusting. Don't blindly stick to plans. And most importantly, your partner should always be your priority. What about now? Will you continue active duty? I'm thinking about retiring. This operation changed me. I want peace more than war now. I'm thinking the same thing. Maybe I can buy a small ranch in Arizona. You can find a place nearby, too. 6 months later, Chris and Rodriguez retired. Chris bought a small house in Arizona, and Rodriguez got one in a nearby town. Both began working part-time as instructors at the local police department, giving young police officers sniper and tactical training. Final life lessons and legacy. Today, Chris Troy sits on his Arizona ranch sharing these stories. War, says Chris, is not only fought with the enemy. Sometimes you fight with your own decisions, your own mistakes. The mistakes we made in that 2001 operation. First mistake, we didn't do enough research. We didn't verify Dr. Petrov's true identity. Second mistake, we didn't validate the person we trusted. We didn't understand Agent Miller's role well enough. Third mistake, we acted hastily in the minefield. We didn't plan carefully. Fourth mistake, we panicked when we lost communication. But the biggest lesson is this. Making mistakes is human. What matters is learning from these mistakes and never repeating them. Rodriguez, now 65, is teaching these lessons to young police officers. David Miller Jr. is also following his father's footsteps, serving in SEAL operations. Agent David Miller's story is not forgotten. Chris says, his sacrifice continues to live on in his son and in us. My reason for sharing this story with you is simple. Real heroes live and die quietly, but their stories light the way for future generations. The greatest success in life is not being perfect. The greatest success is learning from your mistakes and teaching others. Chris ends a story like this. I am Chris Troy, 67 years old, retired Navy SEAL. I served my country for 23 years. I successfully completed most operations. But the operation I learned the most valuable lesson from was the one that failed. Because success makes you arrogant. Failure makes you wise. And wisdom is the most valuable thing you can have as you age.